Hey guys, Robert here, and it's great pleasure and a great honor to have with me the former publisher of DC Comics, former executive editor even before that, Mr. Dan Didio.
Good to see you. Yeah.
Yep,
I have
yep.
a
Thank you.
lot of fun around for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Thank you so much for joining. And first of all, before we get started, I wanted to talk about one thing that always stuck with me. Many years ago, back when Dwayne McDuffie was still with us, when he was on Justice League, I always remember
Yeah.
I went to a Chicago convention and I had asked you specifically about the female Dr. Light. You pointed me and said, Justice League, wait and see. And then I immediately emailed Dwayne. He said, I had no clue about that. I don't know anything about that. She later popped up. And then not long afterwards, I met him a year before he died at Motor City. And he said, oh, not long after he sent that email, I got word for Dan saying, put her in the book. And that is just one thing that always stuck with me, that in a way, because of me suggesting that to you, she not only ended up in the book, but then James Robinson would use her in the Superman books. And in a way, I'm almost in part because of her getting a bit of a resurgence was because I suggested that to you.
Good character. It's a good character.
Yep, a very good character. Yep. And so yeah, you've been in the industry for quite a good length of time. You were at the main guy at DC for like about 16 years or so, correct? Yep. Oh, I think we're still having audio issues.
Okay.
Yep. No idea what's going on. Feels like I start to hear you part way through and then not. Okay, you might want to try. Here's the way I suggest. You see the settings down there? Go there, go to audio, set it to default, and then set it to whatever your microphone is. Let's see if that fixes it.
I'm a bit of a Luddite, so you got to.
Okay, there's a little gear. There's a little gear at the bottom. You see it on the bottom right.
Hold on.
You see a plus right next to the plus. It's a gear.
Oh, got it. Yeah. Got it.
Yep. Then you go to audio, and then audio input. Set it to default, and then set it to whatever your audio, like what. Basically, you set it to default, then manually to whatever audio setting.
Got it. That way. Okay.
Okay. Let's see if that works. Yep.
There you go.
Okay. Yep. There we go. So beforehand, though, but before you were at DC, you did television, ABC, and Mainframe. And one of the first times I've ever saw your name was Reboot Season 3, the best season, if you ask me.
Yeah. There's a good story with Reboot. Started. What happened was that on ABC there was a lot of pressure on the show from. There was a lot of things we wanted to do that were. So when I left ABC and editor on Reboot, we wound up doing at ABC, and we had a lot of fun with it.
Oh, I always remember the line from at the end of season 2. Sir, the ABCs are attacking us. Those treacherous dogs.
Yeah, that was easy. We were on the phone. Yep. At that, I had 2 shows to deliver. The network was still trying to give Brooke on what to do and what not to do, and the person who created the series, one of the creators of the series, seeing them to death to the point they realized all. And I remember this dead silence proved this script. I got nothing. Then they said approved. So it just shows you how Auburn.
Yep. But yeah, season 3 though, it's when you guys took it from partway through season 2. Was that? Do you know if that's when they knew as well that they were going to wrap it up, and that's where they went from it being episodic to serialized?
Well, it's what we see. The first season was script wise, so all I came in to do was it became producible. With the second things new and different, and then when we ultimately we the types of stories we wanted to tell. So we had a lot of the most famous ones. It was the Mad Max rift into a big rock, and the script was completely um, and the with the broadcast analyst and said, listen, we took and they showed him where all the notes were, and they were to fully accept the script without saying that's how crazy the systems were over there. But towards the end, we got to do the show. We and by the third season, we did the show we want.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good ride.
Right. Yeah, because season 3, I mean, yeah, again, that was my favorite. How it was like a bunch of mini arcs. You got a couple of comic creators and Star Trek writers as well. Marv Wolfman, DC Fontaine, one of my favorite episodes of that season. And by the end of it all, you had things both a good finale, but still lead into season 4. But were you involved with the 4th season?
I was less. I was still story. We were little less on because the company. And I had taken on the role of really being the creative affairs there, which means I was and working with a bunch of people on that. So hands on.
Yeah.
The third season for me was pure math. We literally sat in one of those places where they have and we literally covered both sides of the notes that ultimately became season 3.
Yep.
One little really Jenga thing because it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Origami there.
And yeah, what is your thoughts on what they did with the Guardian Code? If you have any opinions on that show whatsoever?
You know, it's like a lot of things or leave a company. I sort of actually go back and look at what they're doing, folks there. But I'm not really that familiar with reboot.
Right. Because yeah, they decided to go a live action hybrid type of show.
Yeah,
And now I get it. They had to get a new voice for Megabyte. Tony J's no longer with us. They got a perfect replacement though. But then it felt like when they finally just go, let's go to mainframe. I don't know why they decided to be mean spirited towards fans about it. And it's like, wait, why are you guys doing that? It's like,
again, like I said, I didn't see any. Like I said, I know leaving the computer of what it was. So that was always us to come out once, and that was for that final episode. There's a funny story for that final episode. We're working the whole thing out, and we worked out full about it, and we're watching it, and there's this out, and the kid hits the button that says restart and rebuilds itself and all that, and we watched it in the room. We're all sitting there going, and they go, instead of restart, and you hear everybody just we missed the best.
Oh yeah, for reboot. You had the best chance for reboot. Yep. But yeah, I mean, I get it. It's what the computer code is. You don't do reboot like that. But it's like that would have been so great. But
that would have been that's the perfect ending.
Yeah. Exactly, definitely. But I mean, that's what I love best about that season was how characters. There was no status quo. You would have you would shake up the status quo constantly. Right at the pinnacle, of course, having Enzo becoming Matrix, Andrea growing up, and all that. Frisket's the only one who stayed the same.
Yeah, no, but that was always the plan. We wanted about watching Matrix lose down the same path. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, what eventually led to you getting the job at DC?
Well, actually, I was working at mainframe for a number of years. Actually, living on the East Coast of the U.S., on the West Coast of the U.S. I had office. I was traveling up to Toronto broadcast where we're handling from YTV. Exhausted, flying a lot, so a little more stationary. And I had a mutual friend. I jokingly say this, but it's kind of true. With Paul Levitz, who was an outside experience, but I had both. So I thought I was going to sit down. Instead, I wound up having dinner with Paul, which got me the job at DC.
Right, right. And when you came around, that's the one thing my blind spot was, and I looked up stuff. When you got on, obviously it was not long before, things led down to Infinite Crisis. Was there anything that came around the Infinite Crisis that was already set up before you came on, or was that all you?
And that was me. I was working with Jeff Johns and Judd Winnick, and when we all got together, we crafted this. Ultimately, starts with the countdown to probably takes us all the way through to weekly series. I think that's that day of work. But it was massive, a lot of planning. What I would do here, I would build a master plan of every 3-4 months, what story beats I'm looking for, connect the universe, and we handed it, and everybody would work to that plan, and then I sure where these cross points were occurring. So but it was a lot of coordination. It's hard to sustain that, but 4 or 5 years.
Right, right, definitely. And now I had a friend who wanted me to bring this up, and he would kill me if
Sure.
I don't. And that was when it comes to Stephanie Brown. What was the decision with killing her off? And I do know the whole idea of making her a Robin to give her death more importance, but why kill her off?
It was a peripheral character at the start. It was part of actually that happened. That was actually at the very early of my tenure, and part of the killer, but I was the goblin to make it more valuable because I didn't think the character.
All right.
So what happened was it was a plan because they were trying to have that big emotion, and ultimately I said about this character, then ultimately your big moment's not going to land. We built her up, and the only way we could do it is put her in a suture and then rip it out from underneath her. And then
Right.
got a lot more gravitas in
So,
the story
yeah.
beat.
Yep. So you've got some notoriety. You've got some infamy of having characters killed off. But this was one of the cases where this was not your orders. The only
No,
order you had was to make it more important.
yeah, and actually, like I said, and little did we made it so important that everybody was. I guess it's sort of a win. Mission accomplished there. So it was.
Yep,
It was
definitely. And hey, she's still recognized as a Robin to this day, even though she was in it for what, a few issues?
probably 1.5, if that much.
Yeah, 1.5 plus a bunch of tie-ins. I think it's the tie-ins that gave it more importance.
Well, that's one of the things that was important about the tie-ins. By other books, validates helps elevate the importance of it. Do it in your self-contained story in your own little world. Moves out and starts to play against others. Then all of a sudden it starts to lift higher. Right? The Batman books, they worked in a bubble, and they were having major events taking place, but when you cross them over, all of a sudden because you're realizing that story, but other characters' stories too.
Right. And now, of course, and that's one thing that I really did love about your tenure was these big, long stories. I mean, and it's also all the other creators involved, but it just felt like so many things kept leading into it. And while Marvel was doing their own thing with their own big events, it felt like each event felt more like we're just getting to the next event. Whereas DC felt like this event would lead into a whole bunch of other events down the line. And yeah.
What you like that? You need a big event, but you also need a efficacious event to have some sort of effect on the stories. If you think ever really matters, because it's just going to. The good part is when you have an event, it lands. You see how it changes. changes the status quo. Once that status quo becomes the new status, so there's a rhythm to the way these things are released, stepping on it. The problem was, though, once you accelerate that, the stories start getting closer together, and the event.
Hmm. Right, right. And now another thing that happened around Infinite Crisis was killing off Ted Cord and replacing him with Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
right.
what was the stuff behind that? Like, was it a case of let's try and into? And I'm asking this from a more modern sensibility, but back then, was it a case of we just want to make a new, younger character? Was him being from down south? Was that always important from the get go, or was that just part of the character development?
It's interesting with Ted Cord, and I had read that entire in the '80s, and I was fond of the character in the Justice League International books. Turned him into a bit of a joke, and then he had a heart attack, and he was taking on all the foibles old to be a superhero. And I know there was stories about there was plans down the line, but ultimately we needed to tell was to have this incredibly smart, but task just to show how dangerous the threat. What Countdown to Infinite Crisis did, and when it's probably one of his most heroic stories. But in some ways, he's solving heroes don't see, and he gets to the heart of it. It needs about what's going on, but it ultimately he was smart enough to figure it out, but not as by saying that it meant that the arrows and more of them understanding what was about to happen. So it was a big send off. We did want to update that, and it really was Keith Giffen and do and on that and about what the series was and what the book was going to be, build something around the idea of the Scarab, abilities of that, and it was starting to fill a different spot and really try to do more so than anything else.
Right, definitely. And yeah, Infinite Crisis came out. It was the first true sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths. And now, whose idea was it to eventually, through both Infinite Crisis and 52, bring back the multiverse but keep it limited? Whose idea was that?
That was the four writers of the mini series
Yep.
of the series. They as the story goes, really upset with me for something at one point. Verse. So
I heard that. I've heard that.
But they put the multiverse back as a table, just idea. But once they presented the story, it really played out, and multiverse, the new opportunities there again, bring it back the way it was. Bring it back, just as going to bring it back because it left for the same reason why it went away. But the good energy that Grant Morrison had put in all the different worlds and seeing the potential of it, really expanding on it, and also at the same time, all a very distinctive point of view, so that just not dramatically different. I think that's when you potential and let's go for it,
Right. Let's just one other thing. I just want to try and track. I want to check your microphone, or is your microphone built into your computer? Maybe check to see if that might be an issue because I'm noticing it's starting to get really bad. And we can make out majority of what you're saying, but yeah.
Sorry about that. Hold on a second. I'm on my mouth before. That's the weird part about it.
Gotcha. I got you. I mean, again, we can make out majority of what you're saying. It's just that there's some information that's being lost, and I don't want to ask you a question and then have most of it get garbled. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa! whoa. Oh, that went a little loud.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, it could be restream. That could be the issue.
Yeah. Is this?
It's back to where it was. I'd say, yeah. If we have anything that's any issues, just yeah, go on, keep talking while you're trying to figure it out.
Sure. Okay. Buttons while I'm talking, but you keep bring.
But there we go. Okay, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good.
Okay, we're gonna leave it.
Nope.
I'm not gonna touch
Yep.
it.
Yep, leave it right there. There's still some issues, but if there's a big gap, I'll just ask you to repeat a part of the question. All right then. So yeah, so we have the and 52. Oh, I realized I gotta go back a bit. One of the other big things was bringing back Hal Jordan as Green Lantern. And if I understand, that was one of the big things you wanted to do as soon as you got there. Like you wanted to bring Hal back, right?
Again, it was with a joke, and I used to joke since Hal died, he was in more books dead, and flashback story was told. There's Hal Jordan, the fact that he becomes the Spectre.
Mm-hmm.
Think of a mask and the Green Lantern, his identity. He's a Spectre, and he couldn't shed his Green Lantern.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until I saw Johns, who really was the one who had the story, thing from beginning, middle, and end. And he had the story. That took a lot of convincing internal time spent to take down Hal Jordan, to break it all down. And it's everybody that the mistake was the stories were weak, not the characters themselves. Story with it, the character can work. And was in the end result. You get Green Lantern series, and ultimately you have Green Lantern 2 franchise in DC for years.
Yep, definitely. Right, and I think what you did. Yep, and I think what you said there was best of all. And what I think truly defines your tenure is that the characters came first in a lot of regards. It's like, or the story came first as well. When it came to that, it's like the story, because you have some people doing stories where it's like, let's shake up this character, and then it's like, well, what's the story? Oh, this character's this and that, but what's the story?
Yeah.
And I've noticed that, but with your tenure, it feels. Yeah, yep. Go ahead.
No, go finish it.
I was just gonna say yeah, again, your tenure. That's why I feel like that's something that has been a bit lost since you left, and I feel like it was one of the things that definitely kept you going past what Marvel was doing, because there was the point where Marvel was saying, let's shake up all these characters. Oh, you don't like it? We're not going to give you another option. Things like that. Whereas DC though felt like you guys shook the characters up when it needed to, but it fit the characters. It told good stories rather than just shaking up for the sake of shaking up.
Well, the most important thing I could tell you at event, it's not about making the changes to the characters. The effect of that change is after the change. What's it? If you're going to do stories that it creates by making that change, if back to normal, I would throw the idea out. They're just, if you're doing something just for the emotionalism or just for a headline, a reason to do it. And when you do that, superficial, and than that, you know what I'm saying? The fans know it's being done, just to and I think that's.
Yeah, and I think one of the prime examples I've always recalled this most of all is when Batwoman was announced. You guys were ready to bring in Kate Kane, that she happens to be a lesbian, and I do recall there was news articles saying she's a lesbian superhero. And from what I understood, if I heard correct, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys were then like, no, that's not what we're wanting. She's a superhero that's a lesbian, not a lesbian superhero. Right. You guys then put her on the back burner until the hype died down, and you started up again with it to make sure people knew what it was, not what they misinterpreted.
Again, the thing, Batman family is very particular on superpowered characters, and they're all pretty much from the same place. So you have to create some different backstories so that they have, or else if you don't do that, then it's all just the same character. That's I saw somebody write about Nightwing. My 2 or 3 characters act and do this. Ultimately, something's got to give. If you give me a reason why each character exists, there, because as you start to replace them similar, that becomes a problem. So that you know, so that's one of the things about it. It's like, why are we bringing this character that nobody else can do? What makes them has to feel unique?
Yep. I completely understand that. And yeah, that is a good point because you don't want to get overloaded with duplicates and similar characters. It's like how many Teen Titans have there been in there, but they have like what makes them different from the others? What makes them stand out? Is that kind of where the gag of they became cannon fodder for a while because there was just like so many of them you can just bump off?
Well, I can't tell you how many times you have a writing change team come on board. The first thing I want to do is create another Robin or create another thing, not the same one again. Just cut that off before it happens. And so, but the Batwoman was wanted to make a statement with the have a strong Batwoman character, and that's really interesting about her. You know, the Army Batman. That's a different character from any other, and I think that's what really in skill set. She came in with a different set of training.
Yep, and I agree. And that's one thing I really liked about Kate. And then, of course, later Grant revealed because there were some people who were under the misconception, oh, she's Cassie Kane. I was like, and then Grant was like, no, two different characters, very two different characters. And that's one thing I always gave props to Grant. He made sense when things were people with some of the nitty gritty questions some people had, like that, like is she Kate Kane? No, she's Bruce's cousin.
Yeah,
Cassie was married into the family. She wasn't even a Kane.
and
But
and Grant is, you know, first of all, he's the one person who understands continuity better, and he could figure out ways to make evidence of what story it is. And if you look at his back, indicative of how many crazy ideas in the world that he found the way to character that the character that I gravitated that cow in because I wound up doing a couple of and I always laugh because Tiny Titans of all places. I mean,
Tiny Titans.
he literally sees hold as part of it ongoing continuity of it all.
You're right. Speaking of, I know about your love for the Metal Man. I heard a lot of your stuff on Word Balloon. You answered some of my questions there, but what was your take on what Grant brought to the Metal Men? That
Grant's
yeah,
Grant's behind my own. No, just behind the originals. No, behind the originals. He did a brilliant job. That and I was saying to somebody because I had a chance to write Metal Man series, the Wednesday Comics, Buckley series, and you know just show those characters off. You know, look what he did with Doom. Those are the type.
oh yeah,
Those all come from this. You know,
yeah.
I was so me was just happy to see the Metal Men getting this real high attention span. Started to recognize who they were and start to have fun with them, as you know.
Right, and then he also brought in Copper. Who? How come you didn't keep Copper around in your series?
It's a strange story. It's actually strange. It really. He's at ABC. I made a series,
Yep.
and Jeanette Kahn and Louis Simonson, and because as ABC, I was going to put they handed it off, and what it was, but what they did with what I thought the series was going to be, and we had this, and they added the cop character in there. It always rubbed me the wrong way because that people had to add another character because the character they had, and a copper is because our team, the team that I grew up with, and issues, and if it was an ongoing series, but for me, I added one new character, and that one because he was the catalyst for the story, and I character to be a catalyst.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. Now, I also, speaking of which, I have a bunch of your comics here, but one run I actually did like you did was your Outsiders run. That was a very interesting run of yours, and I was just wondering, what was your end goal? Because obviously you got cut off a bit short by the end, but what was your end goal with it?
Oh, that's funny you said that. Actually got cut off because of Blackest. Strangely enough, in Blackest was Terra was going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Terra was coming back and teasing the ghost of Terra. The ghost of Terra was going to haunt Geoforce. Started to get a little unhinged, on him. And ultimately, tonight, and be his lady, telling her brother about all the things he's doing to be a better leader. And ultimately, I was to become DC's Doctor Doom.
Oh,
that's where I was heading with that. I wanted him, and I wanted that. I wanted to turn Varia, and ultimately, Force was going to be the main villain again. They let that happen. So, well, that's where that. Yeah. At the last minute, with Blackest Night, the team decided they didn't want to bring Terra back, and this is when as you're your writer. The writer half of Dan Didio got screwed. My story got completely lost because of it. I understood the reasons why they took her out, her in, so I had to support the choices that was a book that was so.
Right. Yep.
And at that point, I sort of lost interest, and I said, "Okay, let's go somewhere else,"
Right, and I gotta say, Freight Train, the fact you tied him into Bloodlines was a crazy idea. I'm like, okay, I did not expect him to tap right back into Bloodlines like that.
Everyone, you know what? Again, it goes when you go to DC all the time. DC in the late '60s, early '60s was riding the wave of the Batman TV. Every comic they're selling everything because of Batman. All the comic sales drop on, and then every other series that was tied in. DC were getting younger, getting attention, so they try to create Hawk and Dove. They create the Creeper, Metamorpho, all these really crazy ideas, right? And they're still scrambling until later. But all those crazy characters, there's a bunch of people who read them, and then all of a sudden they find ways to make them work. Homage to a big event that they thought were going to be interesting that didn't work, but at least I could say here's one if it didn't originally come from there. So it was my way to
exactly. I mean, it's right up there. Like besides Hitman, he's the only Freight Train's the only other person I can recognize from that event.
Hitman was the only success out of the Bloodline success.
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I had one. I was going to bring up one other point with it. Oh yeah, Believe it or not, though, I don't know if you've kept up with current DC, but Joshua Williamson, during his Shadow War, actually tied back into Geoforce being unstable from your stuff. He didn't do a direct reference, but he does reference the event from the Last Will and Testament of the DC Universe, which you also tied it into, and
Yeah.
basically had it be that he snaps after events of Checkmate, and he completely snaps and decides to take out both the League of Shadows, Raish and Deathstroke at the same time. So in a way, he's indirectly playing off of what you set up that no one's tapped into for years.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, I always thought Geoforce had a lot of potential, and the fact that his sister went off the deal, like, there's a bloodline effect. That's why I'm glad to see somebody playing that game.
Yeah. Was Joshua Williamson? He was a hire under still when you were working there, correct?
I mean, there's a famous story that I think they actually short of. Josh was a long time and had done short stories here. No, York. We were San Diego Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to have a meeting with him at the complete opposite end of the San Diego floor. Entire floor to come see me. So by the time he gets a small storage room and he's shouting his story to push me against the wall to the point that a couple of people were wondering what was going on there. But he was his Flash story. And graciously shut down the Flash to have a better idea. I gave him what the issues were and came back later and with the things that work. And then I left. You know what happened? And I think he bumped into me and I said, what's going on? What happened? I said, what do you mean? The new Flash writer.
Which I guess, he is very much. I know Jeff is busy in Hollywood, but I feel like Joshua is filling his shoes. Like he has a similar writing style to Jeff, and that's one thing I appreciate. That so long as there's someone who's like Jeff working at DC, there's always going to be someone who can bring in great stories that from old lingering plot threads. For example, I mean, when he was bringing back stuff that Jeff left dangling from the Flash, I was like, oh shit! And that's when I knew we had someone special. Was when he did the Flash War.
Good about all that is that it shows, he see the whole path and see all the characters, and constantly pitching ideas and constantly see different suggestions going forward. So I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, so of course eventually we led to New 52, and from actually no, before we get to that, one thing could you clarify, was Final Crisis always meant to be the end of the Crisis trilogy? Because when you look at it, it never felt like it connected to the other books, the other Crises.
It did your changes made along the way. I mean, I had for Final Crisis, seat of mine. My conceit was that the reason that kept on forcing reboots was that the entire DC universe was aging up, and Wonder Woman weren't allowed to age. And because of that, you constantly fit these log jams. That's how you get all these characters. They just keep to stop or get aged down, so they don't make Wonder Woman. So what happened? You got to forgive me. I'm trying to remember in order.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, plan where basically the Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. This is all your fault. You were supposed to die. You were supposed to move aside. This universe is trying to move ahead, and you keep you're the big clog in this.
Oh no. Yeah.
And that was the plan. And ultimately, the thought was three characters out. That's where the Dick Grayson and his Robin story was. Grayson and his Batman story is coming from. And an ultimate DC universe over here, Batman and young Bruce Wayne, young Clark Kent, Diana Prince over here, and we're going to run two concurrent lines, quote unquote, Ultimate CC, and then the main line.
Wow.
The idea was killed. And
Ooh.
and then we were scrambling his work. So everything, thank God it was Grant on the art. Ultimately, he can adjust and turn, pulling it all together and making it all happen. But
Wow.
there was happening around the edges that affected, what happens ultimately. Success makes you have to have more. The biggest problem in Final Crisis was that we moved it up a year or two too early and have as we were when we built ourselves into Infinite Crisis. The pathway, by doing so, it made it. That's why the guys who were doing the weekly were wrap up all the storylines and into the series that would have been on a, and we also wouldn't have started the second. Would have given ourselves some breathing room.
Oh, I gotcha. Wow, I did not know about that one. That is news to me on that one, because I mean, there's some stuff you just don't know because obviously things don't get out there. But yeah, wow, that is a completely different story.
I'm gonna say, you know why they don't get out there? We're telling stories. The bottom line is give you excuses attached to it. We're gonna put out our best. We could hit. If it doesn't work, we got to take the six work. And that's the way. That's the rule of the game. You're not here why things work or don't work. We're here to tell stuff. That's our job. So we can't and put something else out. We don't have time to worry too much about the past. We have to.
Yep. Now, when it comes to the Flash, with Flash Rebirth, what eventually led to that? Was it always a case of we got to wait for Jeff to get an opening, or was it something else entirely that made it get to before you eventually got to bringing Barry back?
Yeah, you know what? We back for a couple of reasons. There was a lot of conversation about Flash TV shows and films. So the truth be told is all those talents. So I didn't want work so anybody else telling stories with characters. We had to be the leaders of the IP. It was important for us to get in front of the station and get on the same time. Molly West. Everybody brings up Molly West. One of the issues. It's just that when Molly West was Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Mike was an interesting character. There was a lot of he had a lot of problems. It was an interesting of Flash, and also relearning his power. And then ultimately we have a great run. Mark Waid has a brilliant run on that book. Jeff has a brilliant run. By the time you get later down the road, sense of purposes, Barry Allen, same character. And the reality is, other one is West without the knowledge of Barry Allen. With the 52 weekly, 52, we wanted characters that didn't have to rely to tell their own story, and moved from the origin story. Expression, I said, probably one of my favorite ever read on the return of Barry Allen in the Wally. Best story ever.
Oh, but I have the trade on my bookshelf.
Yeah, it's one of the best stories ever told. The problem is that's exactly what the problem with that.
Right.
There is no story without Barry Allen.
Yeah, that is, and I think Jeff probably did that better at separating Wally from Barry compared to Mark. Yeah, but but of course, eventually, then you had the new 52 drop. Things got shaken up, unless you were Batman or Green Lantern. and
Yeah, Batman and
but
Green
you,
Lantern got shaken up the least, primarily most, and sales was nervous about change.
right. But eventually, then you did OMAC. You started doing a lot more writing going to New 52, especially with OMAC. I loved the OMAC and how you kept bringing him back constantly. And what made you come up with OMAC and make him so similar yet radically different from Kirby?
Well, here's the thing. I was doing more writing because of the publisher position, executive editor position, involved in the creative than most people think. Early stages, and I would say, individual building of the books, I was not that hands-on. Leading into the launch, and then pretty much I was hands-off on everything. Is that it was a way for me to stay connected to the line without seeing the line per se. So that's one of the reasons. I also, it gave me some creative fun, gives you a chance to show what you want to do by example, than just constantly talk about it. But here's the thing about the Kirby stuff. Every single Kirby book, I think people know that more. Also, as an executive, I have to that successful. Not only weren't they successful, basically were very material, weren't strong or successful. There's something that's not clicking, and do a carbon copy of one of the greatest artists. So you have to find a way to says and does, and the craziness and the table, and find a way to channel that and feels that it would be extension of what he did itself. And that's the way I love to approach the, working with Keith Giffen was one of my favorite. Keith and I worked. We started. Do we want to do something else together, and we wound up on.
You eventually did.
Exactly. And
yep.
We moved over that. What happened with Keith got sick. And I felt terrible. What happened when he just wasn't getting a lot of fill-ins. So,
right.
So I never developed that book, but we had I still have.
Oh yeah.
For people.
Yep. When I met him at a convention once, and maybe it's because he was sick, he kind of felt like, I wouldn't say he said he had a bad time, but I think his memories of it were tainted by being sick during it. It felt like.
No, that's Keith's personality.
That's true. I mean, we're talking about the guy who keeps on wanting to say, if you ever make a Karate Kid, if I'm ever on the book, I'm killing him off no matter what. Right?
Keith was the first creator I ever met at DC. So I didn't know anybody. And he stuck you're the new guy. He points at me. I said, yeah. He goes, get out of here. Get away from here. Run.
Oh boy, I still love how he portrayed you during Ambush Bug.
Yeah, he was killing me. But I put that last issue on hold because their book just making fun of me, and I'm like, I don't know who wants to read that.
Well, apparently a number of people from what I understand.
Yeah.
But also one of my favorite projects you've done, and myself in comics, Bianca, she's in the chat. She and I went over it a couple of weeks ago. Was the Commandi Challenge? We love this. This was a brilliant idea. You guys doing the DC challenge, but doing it in a way that was a love letter to Jack and eventually Len Wein, who passed away before you finished. It was finished, and just phenomenal story overall. Though, although if I could be honest, too many people just having him fall. That was their cliffhanger.
Yeah. unfortunately, there's a lot of craft comics anymore. I call it, and you
Yep.
just got to think a little bit. It's funny, it's interesting. Read Jeff Johns' scripts. Your scripts are most interesting to me. His dialogue goes just a little first, meaning that most people end a sentence, next word balloon. A little bit extra to give those characters a little more depth and a little more heart. You know what I mean? And everything. You gotta, if you understand the craft and reality to what we do, that's very, very easy to do. But the reality is, you put so much effort into it. That's why the 50. These are writers taking 5 pages in a weekly book as they put in a monthly book. Because they knew that they had moments, and you got to understand that it's not pushing it out the door and that's not good enough anymore. You have to be to give that depth to story, depth to character. Come back and read another one after that, and so that's why and in a book like that, where other people, you're in competition with other writers. So I got to make sure my stuff, if it's next to real good stuff, it's going to look real your game up a little bit,
Oh yeah, definitely. And I still remember. I think it was Bill Willingham said it best. He probably was the most creative of the endings, where Kamani gets cut open. But he said in his, "Oh, I was going to have it be Kamani got turned into a bunch of jars and everything." They told him, "No, don't." And then he's like, "Well, let's see him get out of this one. I have an idea in my head. I can't wait for Steve Orlando to come begging to me." And then Steve called him up saying, "Here's my idea." Oh, I didn't think of that one. It was
that. And by the way, that's the best. It's seeing somebody come up with a solution to the problem. That's the good part. That's the good stuff.
Definitely. Yep. And I was going to say, one of my other favorite ones you had done was your Top Cat stuff, and you really got a good handle on Top Cat. I mean, granted, Shane Davis is handling him felt a little weird compared to the one in the backup.
Yeah, well, Shane was drawing his cat, and Phil Winsley was drawing Top Cat.
The cartoon.
But both stories were fun.
Yep. Right, but I definitely love though how you turn in a nice nod to the Phoenix Saga at the end. I was like,
"Yes, you found it."
Yep.
See that joke?
Yep.
I
love that joke. I loved it. Just like, oh yeah, I found one planet with an ancient, peace-loving civilization. It seemed the perfect place for you to bring Kalian to spend the rest of his days around a warm and loving people that accept him without question. Well, he did seem happy there. Maybe this is a place he can regrow his people and rise from the ashes. I died laughing when I read that. I died laughing.
Well, if you follow the writers, I actually spent time teaching Outsiders, so that way I can have somebody say Outsiders, which was a parody of a line from the first Giant Size.
Right. Now, whose idea was?
But Top Cat for me was Howard the Duck.
Oh yeah, definitely. I kind of had that feeling. Now with Phantom Stranger, and you worked on it with James DeMatteis. Whose idea was it to have him finally give him a definitive origin as Judas?
Yeah, that was I brought primarily to help me with the dialogue, because ultimately, he's so lyrical, and I needed the book to. So true.
Right.
And it was, and and I knew him. So it was this interesting dynamic. But I got to do to create a family for him and all that's a long time. Because I always said, no, he's a stranger. And I said, yes, in the world. He doesn't have to be know who he is and what his motive. That way, we empathize to him what his struggle is about and what his story is about. As a stranger with no background, no sense of happen, he just becomes a narrator or a cipher, meaning people change it to fit whatever story you want to be. So you got to get them to create that structure. You can move that story.
Right. And I will say this, though, the fact that you timed the Judas, there were some of his origins did actually still time into the Bible. He was either the wandering Jew or there was another biblical one. I forget what that one was. But yeah, so it's not like it's unheard of that he was Judas.
The story was going to be, and it got crazy to the end. Was they were the three greatest sinners, and that's why they were put on these paths. People into the world, fandom, and the trick was the last one was, which is a story I didn't get to, but I didn't get to it. Was the question person in the world brought on Armageddon, meaning he was brought to the past, and he had to stop himself becoming.
Oh, that would have been nice.
But the problem happens is that interpretation who this question was what they wanted to be anything different, and that's when I see that the logic of the 52 launch started to fade, meaning wrappings of who the characters were before abilities where you can take them going forward. So that when I felt the wheels came off the.
Right. So now, of course, after Dark Knight's Metal, you guys eventually did the New Age of Heroes, with you helping do Sideways, which I adore. Just this idea of a Spider-Man, but with the multiverse in general. But the idea of the New Age of Heroes was, I know it was originally, let's put these big name artists on board for the first couple issues and then move them off, which, from what I understand, that ended up being the biggest common complaint afterwards, that people are saying, like, why didn't they stick around here? Was that something you kind of knew, you kind of predicted was going to happen, or was it like you just...
Here's the thing. I was hope was that the characters would take off, and because the names of the artists carry them forward. But a lot of the guys, they're looking at drawings, so, and I was looking to invest that we're going to help expand the DC universe. So I was trying to get them on the table, and each one of those characters specifically to fill needs of DC universe, and that's one reason. Metal gave us an opportunity to deeply ingrained in their own stories and storylines, really embraced them and found a way to use them. They independent of it. A lot of times when under an umbrella, most people don't want to fit into the rest of the universe, which is a shame. Point, I wasn't on the ground the books the same way I did during the days of, because I would have had every one of those characters, during their first 3 to 4 that we were behind them. Maybe the artists would have stuck with them more because in a good way,
Right, but at least with you, Ken has stuck around throughout the majority of it, so you lucked out in that regard.
I became friends during the process of that. He's actually worked with them since leaving DC, and I think he's an incredible talent and youth. That's really lacking from the DC books. I want his characters feel old. They act to behave somebody who needed to behave and acted like a kid.
Yep. And then you introduced the character of Tempest Fugit, I believe is how you say his name.
Fugitive.
Yeah. You did, and I like him, and he's actually stuck around. He's become almost the DC Universe's and, uh what's the word I'm looking for? Uatu.
Watch us. Yep. It's a little watch a character. Believe it or not, that what happened was that Kenneth did just all these, and I'm just looking at him like I'm going to use it out of his file there. It's pretty amazing, you know. It's just
Right. Now, one of there was also another question I had someone wanted me to ask, which was right before New 52 happened, there was going to be a crossover with the Justice League and Transformers that Phil Jimenez had worked on. His artwork is still out there showcasing it. You know, like Optimus Prime with a Green Lantern ring and Megatron holding Superman's cape. But when the New 52
yeah.
happened, it kind of fell apart. Was there ever plans of ever going to go back to it? Or was it so ingrained in the old universe you didn't feel that was necessary?
It was so ingrained in the old universe, and it's a nice thing. It's a lot of fun today. It didn't service DC as well.
Right. But then, of course, eventually you got doing more crossovers. Batman, Ninja Turtles, and so many of the others. I mean, how was it great to see some of those take off?
Yeah, you know, it's a business. You know, when you do a crossover like of the companies that you're crossing over with, and had the equal weight of what you were bringing to it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's a it's it's a band-aid fix to the sales problem thing uh, along those lines, but it doesn't have long-term gain. It's in from somebody else or somewhere above splitting the value of the book with another fan of company crossovers. I understood what the interest for you. You know, you have to support them where they made sense.
Right, right. I know that's that was an answer I wasn't expecting, but that's a very I understand that answer. Very good answer. So, of course, obviously, one of the last books you worked on was your Metal Man. You finally got a chance to do it. Besides Wednesday, you finally got a chance to do this. And what made this story like the one you felt like was, in your mind, of course, the definitive Metal Man? Because, like the opening issue, you revealed all the other versions were failures that he just restarted again. Like, what made you decide to saying this is the version I'm going to go with?
Well, a little bit of hush. How about that? Two things. At that particular moment, I knew my tent, so I felt things well. You know, and people always ask me, "What's your favorite character?" One of my favorite characters. Never said it, but so I had taken lot of pitches about him, so I for so long, and I realized that you know that, and it wasn't going to come from somebody else. It was I knew this was going to be positive. Full run of all the Metal Men books. You know, I got them so many things that I loved about them, and what I wanted. And if you have all those books in front of me, you really know. I got a chance to touch upon the Metal Men lore and their villains, but at the chance to write the characters that I see before I left. Omax in there, Phantom Stranger's in there, because ultimately I mean, my only regret on that series, I was going to do a which I was leading to, and do a side of the 12-part story, and then since I wasn't at DC, and it wasn't for me to know what their plans were, what was going up that, and it reincorporated that. At the end, I felt a little rushed at the end, or I thought was going to be done in another book. With the end product at the end of the day, I was really satisfied, and I'm really proud of that book.
yeah, it was a great send off, a great farewell, especially as you brought up again during the word balloon stuff. That at the very end, you gave the keys to Doc Magnus and closed up shop and left him with Tina.
Should
That
be.
was just, yeah, that was
Yeah.
a great nod. And I showed to bring up one thing. I'd had Aaron Lepresti on a couple of months ago, and one of the things he said about you that stuck with me was that if there was a artist that, of course, you felt it was a great artist, you would always make sure they got work. Somehow you would find them. And was that like a yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, I just want to always thank you for giving some of these artists great work, because there's a lot of artists out there that, like Jerry Ordway and all this stuff, you don't see much anymore since you left. And it's like, why can't these guys get more work? Why isn't there someone making sure they get more work?
It's yeah. That's it's all about individualships, you know, and a lot of people and editors like to build people who is like or deliver on time. They develop their own rapport with them. They're people that I always have, and Jan Keith Giffen. There's so much DC and so much we owe them, and they always made sure because the reality is the 70 books, 70 books named these guys. You know what I'm saying?
Yep,
There's no
I know exactly what you're
reason
saying.
not to be. You
Yep,
know,
exactly. Yep. Now,
and I
oh,
always
sorry.
like retroactives and things. The problem is that solved in some way, but I always and that was relatable to somebody's hatred that they came back and they were the ones to I think you're always understanding and respecting the puts come before you. Um, we were renters in that building. I always know we don't own
Right.
these characters. Um, to work with them and we're captains that came before. I think we have to respect too. You
Right.
know?
Now, from your viewpoint as a publisher and executive editor, when you've, like, I don't know if you ever paid attention or whenever you have characters, like companies, writers, whoever, come about and wanting to replace characters or change them or whatnot, be it other versions or whatnot. As either a publisher or executive editor in either one of those hats, what's your viewpoint when you see someone wanting to do that? Like, if say someone came up here and said, I want to make a black Batman, what would be the first question you would ask them?
My first question would be, what's the story? Does it affect
Hmm.
the other ones? How is he different from the other interact? Because ultimately, you don't do it just for the effect. You're doing it for um, and that's the whole thing. At the talent pitching it, whether or not you believe they, because a lot of people might throw that idea, unless they have the cred, um, to be able, very very difficult to do something very. It's very hard. But a talent that has a following, and you're more willing to give them more latitude. You know, in the past they've done it, and it's a balancing act. It's all answer because there's so many you're juggling when you're making these decisions.
Right. Because, and that's just a big question I wanted to ask you, because that's something that I've always seen people talk about. And I'm just saying in general, you see some people saying, like, oh, they made Tim buy. Was there a story to be told? Kind of, sort of, but I'm not asking your opinion on that one. I'm just throwing that out as an example people have had, and it just feels like I do feel that's been lost. That you have some creators who come in who want to put their stamp on it, but they don't have a story to tell. They just want to do their stamp, and it just feels like it's such a shame that we need some people to keep them under control. I'm not saying that these ideas can't be done, but you need someone to be say like, go back, give me a story, then pitch it again. Don't just do it off the bat. And yeah, and that was
Yeah, I mean, tell the story all the time. I was working at ABC on the air, and I remember, and I remember hearing people make sure the station Lynch was under control, and that he was, they had certain, restrictions on him so they could parameters, and they're going to push it. But that box that ABC built, and he punched and molded it to his expectation. Brilliant. Then you get to the second season, the limitations off him. Do whatever you want. Story meanders and it loses focus. Restrictions on characters, people, but I think it forces you to, once you know what your guideposts are, within those guideposts, and push them as hard as you're making them, I think you're going to tell a better story. It keeps the character on track. It keeps this character to push the limits of that story within that. That's how you prove yourself to be a great writer.
yeah, and that is one thing that I've said it before. I think it's one thing that was lost once you were let go from DC because that was always the respectful. That's why I stuck with DC when Marvel lost me. When Marvel started pushing their own stuff, and I'm like, you lost me. DC kept me because, like I said, you respected the characters. Nothing came out just to do it. It was always a case of even if you might not notice it right away, it had a reason for being done. You had a reason for having Batwoman be a lesbian. You had like there was even it was a character trait, wasn't her defining character trait. It was the military that was her defining trait.
Yeah.
Things like that. And that was the problem with the CW show. They did the opposite. They did what you guys were trying to avoid and had to be, she's a lesbian superhero, and look how well that turned out.
Yeah. I'm going to watch the CW shows. Good stuff I hear, but I've never watched it primarily because, as I always used to say at DC, I said in my prime competitor, not Marvel. I compete with Marvel for talent, but I don't compete stories. The stories being told by other mediums, that was my problem.
Right.
Because they become the legend and lore, then it's meaning. So it's very important for us to be the owners of the IP, and then on top of that, be the ones who create it.
Right.
If you lose that, they're own characters, which is a shame.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now, what would you say without? I'm not asking your opinion on the Snyderverse, but when things got really dark, because that's one thing I've noticed people do like to point out to your tenure as saying things got really dark, really violent. Where do you stand on when darkness and violence is is all good to go with, and when do you think it's going too far? Like when I look at what Snyder had done, he went too far dark. If you ask me, with some of his stuff, he had good ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? You need a balance. You know what I mean? You need a break. You need a breath. You know, you want people to catch it, basically reset this moment, and that's why people and things that just to break the tension of things, organic from the characters. More, that's what's most important. They got to feel natural.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I always feel it's good to have breezers. Like when you did Infinite Crisis, you had 52. Got a bit dark, but it was still a good palate cleanser. You had Blackest Night, and you had Brightest Day. Things like that.
And that was always the thing. Over, bring them together, right? Is once you bring them together, then you catch your own breath, tell your own draft, and then come back together again. Once you have, it's always, it's like an accordion.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. And I'm going to open the floor to any questions, just like for the last few minutes we have here. So if anyone in the chat has a question, throw it out there. Just please be respectful and just throw out any questions you may have for Dan.
Yeah, because I want that's what's going on the sidelines over here. Just let you know.
Right. So yeah, for
Guy.
just the next few minutes, if you guys have a question, again, be respectful. Don't ask anything about a creator or something. Just in general, ask this man a question you may have, and let's see if he answers. And if you don't want to answer, you can simply say no comment.
Usually,
What's your favorite character? You think you already mentioned that was the Metal Men, but besides the men, what was your favorite individual character?
My favorite individual. I'm a big Adam. My favorite individual character was Adam and the Phantom Stranger.
Right. Yep.
I'm sorry, did I lose you? What happened here?
No. I'm still here. You went. Your camera went off for a second. Oh, how long has he been working at DC? That was about 16 years, right?
Actually, I started in 2000. Yeah, so almost 20 years. Yeah,
almost 20 years. And Nerdette just want to thank you for your work. She's been one of your defenders. She's a big Jeff John defender. She's one of those who definitely. Oh, what did you think of Netflix Sandman?
Actually, it's funny because actually thought they did a really interesting job. It held my interest. And I'll be honest with you, Netflix series. I have a running joke when I don't know what happened to my video. I apologize. Hold on a second. Let me see if there's.
Yeah, it's all right. It happens. It happens. You're still there.
Okay. I was saying that with Netflix movies, one of the funniest until the 8th episode, it gets good, and I'm like, something you didn't like, and the beginning, which is one of the first series in a while I've been in and enjoyed it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because she's been a big defender of it. Right. If you could create any kind of team, what would the team of characters be?
Well, it's funny you said I have 2 projects coming out. My new company with Frank.
Yep. With the Frank Miller
and enemies, and there's a super team in there called the. It's basically a little bit more than that. That's a nice way to put it. They're clearly understanding what their defense story is. Them understanding what they're being moral decision about whether or not they want to participate. New team that I've got going on there. Really happy with that. A young adult prose novel that's coming out that will also feature a lot of. Got a couple of projects coming out, and I got a chance to do it.
Right. Now, one question I know, since Tavia's not here, I'm just going to pick one of his questions he had asked. I know because I know he spammed a bunch of questions on the word balloon stuff as well, and I know he means well, but there are some times where he hyper focuses on things. But I guess I'll go with this question.
Sure.
Why did you not like superheroes being married?
I think I say it here too. Commitment and sacrifice. Okay. Truly believe for most of the characters, the decisions of putting their own in order to protect someone, go on patrol and do all these other things in a person's life. So a lot of times in order to go forward, I can't see somebody themselves, at the same time that they're trying and solve the problems of the world. To do so, and the story of marriage is usually supposed to be the settling down, the getting comfort dynamic out there, and to be out there and to be heroes. You got to push yourself out there.
Yep.
that I think that ultimately you have to sacrifice. That's my opinion. And people come back, you know, play or the Hawkman and the Hawkgirl, but they were mad and they operate. Their stories operate to all these other characters that started. Something's going to change and come apart. Dynamic of that story too much.
Yep. Yep. And I think she hasn't said it here, but when I've talked with Nerdette beforehand, she's a big fan of Bruce and Talia. She's always said it best. Batman loves Gotham above all
Yes,
else.
absolutely correct. And by the way, I think that's the one in groups they all sacrifice their person in order to be the heroes of Gotham, and their true identities are their secret identities. That's their true identity, because they take that lead from Bruce into themselves.
Yep. Well, Dan, I thank you so much for doing all this. I've run out of questions to
I,
ask, and yep. And yeah, just really appreciate you being on and taking time out. And anything you want to pimp? I mean, I know you got the Frank Miller Presents stuff,
so
of course.
that's coming out in November. I think people. I'm enjoying working. I got a great new audience. Neela Beirut, he's brilliant, and Frank between Sin City and Ronin. You know,
Why do you say that?
the stuff is beautiful. You're gonna love it, and I'm excited about what's ahead. It's reading comics since I've been 10 years old, which means I've been and to still be and have fun doing them. I can't complain. No complaints
Right.
here at all. All good.
Yep.
Appreciate talking to you.
Yep. And thank you everyone for joining, and take